Hi, I'm Gabe Lajeunesse, and this is the Abundance Agenda, where we examine policies that help us build more, live better, and leave no one behind. This project is sponsored in part by Acred Development Holdings, LLC. So this is Gabe Lajeunesse with the Abundance Agenda, and we're pleased to have Mike Miller, the head of the planning department for the city of Montpelier. Mike, welcome to the program.
Great, thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so I've been having some conversations with city planners and city officials, just in mostly in the central Vermont area. We know that we're in a housing crunch. We know, we can look at Vermont Futures Project and recognize the growth that we need to have, to support sort of the aging demographic. So we know all that, and I'm just really curious about what communities are doing proactively to try to enable more housing creation. I'm familiar with some acts that the actions by the city council that you had sort of championed through to make permitting easier. And I'd love to maybe hear, there's a couple that I'm aware of. There may be some others that you want to talk about. But the first one is making it administratively approved to be able to do up to 6 units of housing. So I'd love to hear like what does that mean and how does that, potentially unlock some housing capacity for the city of Montpelier?
It's great to talk with you today, Gabe. So it is really regulations are one of these things. If you're trying to encourage more housing, um, your zoning regulations or any regulations, they tend to be placing barriers to housing if you depending on how the regulations are written. So sometimes if you want to encourage housing, one of the first things you need to do is to look at your rules and make sure that your rules themselves aren't the barriers because there are a lot of things that can get in the way of housing. They could be economic, they could be environmental, they could be there could be a number of issues that could come up that would prevent housing projects from happening. But sometimes in a number of communities, it's simply the regulations don't let you do it. And so, starting in 2014 and then moving to 2018, and since then, right up to now, the city of Montpelier has continued to try to go and look at our rules to make sure that, we want to protect the character of our community. We've got a special place, and we want to make sure it stays that special place and keeps that historic character and we have great neighborhoods and we want to make sure that those are protected. But at the same time, we also need to make sure that we're allowing these smaller, especially infill projects in our historic area to happen. And so one of the big ones was to simply go and try to figure out how can we remove density as a barrier. Sometimes there are large houses that were built at the turn of the last century that were built for families of 6, 7, 8, 10 people. And now there's 2 or 3 people living in those houses.
We have a lot of those in Montpelier.
So we have these large houses, and how can we help to let these get maybe broken into a duplex or an apartment that would let you have multiple units in it? And sometimes you just can't do it because the density doesn't work. So we worked with the city council and the planning commission to simply go through and say, what if we still have other requirements like parking, but what if we simply ignored the density requirement? So if you've got water and sewer, no matter how big your parcel is, if you've got water and sewer, you can have up to 6 units. Um, you still have to meet your parking requirements. You still have to meet your impervious surface. You can't just pave over your lot. So there are certain restrictions that are still in place, but we simply eliminated that one piece because a lot of times, especially close to downtown, there are a number of people who don't have cars and can walk and live in an apartment and just be able to walk downtown. And the only thing that was keeping that fourth or fifth unit from being added to this house is that there just simply wasn't the density to allow it. So this has opened that door. It's removed a barrier. It doesn't require people to put 6 units, but it simply removed that density barrier.
So let me just ask, like in practical terms, what's different since the city passed this? So if I were, let's say I'm one of those, homeowners on Bailey or something, and I've got, a 4,000 square foot place, and I'm like, look, I think we could probably support, I want an owner's unit, and then we could put another 2 or 3 units in here. What's different now versus what it was before?
Well, there are a couple of ones. One was the density, and then another one, as you mentioned, was streamlining the permitting. And so a little bit of that was to make these administrative permits as well. So the process, if you wanted to do that, the process would be much easier for you because you're going to be working with the zoning administrator in order to work through the permit process, as opposed to having a lot of public hearings to make these projects happen, where there's notices in the paper and notices to abutters, and it becomes a much bigger process that has to be handled, as opposed to working to make sure you can go through the checkbox of do you meet this requirement, this requirement, and this
That's so
requirement. So
great.
one, yeah,
So instead of there being a lot of drama surrounding this is just normal business, just like somebody adding a deck to their house. It's just like any other project that we would do, up to 6 units. Anything more than 6 units still goes through all the regular. And your team is prepared to help people figure out how to do that, I imagine, right?
yeah, that's what we try to go and tell people. We know the regulations are they can be lengthy and be difficult to wade through sometimes, but our permit specialists are all here to really guide people through the process. You know, you don't have to know the zoning, you just have to call the planning department, and it's our job to then find out what you're trying to do and then help navigate you through the process.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Just anecdotally, right? Like my mom and brother over in the Portsmouth, New Hampshire area, and when you look at they kind of went through a similar process here about a decade ago. I think they've doubled in population, but it's still retained its character. It's really beautiful. It's cute, but there's a lot of, it's just a different demographic, right? There's more older people that are choosing to retire there, or maybe they work in the city and they go back and forth or something like that. But it's mostly from the condoization of much larger, they're historic homes. We want people to keep them up, but they're beautiful neighborhoods still, right? So there are people that are doing this, and I'm glad that you've brought that and championed that effort. The other one that was interesting, and I can't remember if it was how many lots are allowed, but I have seen some lots that have come up for sale. The other part of infill is that maybe you're not cutting up your own house, but you're sitting on a double lot. Like a lot of people have these extra large lots. And so the concept of, well, how do I subdivide this? I can get a little of my equity that I have in this property out, right? I can get some cash out of it that can take care of my family, but I'm also creating space for a new family to be able to come in and move in. And similar, I understand that there was a process for a normal subdivision that would require all the public notice and hearings. But what is the exception the city council passed on that? And is it similar in terms of your team would work through? What are the new rules?
Yeah, it's another similar one to the permit streamlining. How can we, we really didn't take away any of the regulations. We just identified areas where there were pinch points, and you just start to ask questions. Is there value to something? And we had subdivision regulations that were really maybe a little suburban. And of course, Montpelier is an urban area. And so our rules were really geared towards those, 5 and 10 lot subdivisions out in the country. And so the process was therefore set up to be looking at something large. And most of our subdivisions are, I've got a double lot. They were merged in the past. I just want to go and re-subdivide them so I can sell or build on this extra lot that I have. And it was a big process. So what we've done now is to establish a process that makes these, again, one was to eliminate the the sketch plan review. And then the second piece was to go through and say, all right, now that we don't have a two-step process, we have a one-step process. You can just come in and talk to us about subdividing. We then have small subdivisions that would just be administrative. So as opposed to having a big public hearing about, can I subdivide my lot? Do I have to notice it in the public, notice it in the paper? There are additional um, uh, abutter requirements that have to go into that. And then there's the appeal rights are different. So by having these administrative, we can just go through, work with them and go through and say, do you have the right frontage? Do you have the right lot size? If the answer is yes, then you can have a new lot. We just have to check the boxes. And if you check the boxes, we can administratively issue that permit and get you on your way to the next step, as opposed to needing to get your sketch plan, go back, get your final plan, get your final plats, and then have these hearings that are going to take much longer. So it's a much faster process. And again, it's just it doesn't, in this case, remove any requirements. It simply just moves the process along a little bit faster and helps people um, not have the holding costs. There's, for developers, there are holding costs, and that eventually gets translated to the future project. And if we want houses to be more affordable, every time we add another five and $10,000 onto a new building lot, for example, that five or $10,000 has to get passed on to the buyer, making things less affordable.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. It's great work by you and the city council and obviously the planning commission and others in your on your team that looked at how you can alleviate some of the pressure. We need a lot of housing. There's a lot of data to show how much housing we need, and it's going to take a lot of people to get there. But what I love about these things you've talked about today is a lot of it's just in the hands of individual landowners, right? And we've made it simple. We don't have to worry about the neighborhood getting upset with us and coming out to. And I've heard people talk about this. This is a deterrent, right? That people are going to come out and they're going to be upset about what you're trying to do. And instead, it's like, look, we know we need housing. We want to make some of these things that are smaller and simpler, a small and simple process so that people can do some of that and just create a place for people to be able to come and live and work in our communities. So that's amazing. I'll just ask Mike one other thing. So I know that there's a review happening right now of all of the planning regs. So if there are people who have encountered like some bumps along the way and they think they have an idea on how to smooth things out, what's the right process for people in the city of Montpelier to give you some input, to say, hey, we'd like to see this or that would just enable us to do exactly what we're trying to do, create more housing. How do they get you the input?
Yeah, I mean, anyone can send me an email or to any member of the planning commission. If you go onto the city's website, you can find some of the contact information there. But my contact information is mmiller@montpelier-vt.org. So again, Mike Miller. And if you send me information or questions you think um, I've gone through the process, here was an area where there were some issues because we're going to be looking at a number of ideas and topics going forward from, how can we better handle steep slopes? Montpelier's a lot of floodplain and steep hills, so we have to deal with both of those issues a lot. So sometimes they become issues. Can we continue to have those regulations, just do it better? And we sometimes just have to sit back down. Most of these rules were passed in 2018, and we've now used them for 5 or 6 years. And it's a good time to kind of sit back and reflect and say, some of these rules were new. How are they doing? Are they accomplishing our community goals? We had these for a reason, to make sure that we had safe housing, to make sure we were protecting the environment. But are they unnecessarily burdensome in some way that we can simply adjust them, have the same beneficial effects, and allow these projects to move forward in a better manner?
Well, thanks for doing the review, Mike. And if people have input, this is a great community. We want to make it even better, and appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks, Gabe.
Well, it's great to welcome Joe Camerata from Waterbury. He's the chair of the Waterbury Vermont Housing Task Force. Joe, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So I've been having a lot of conversations with people about how we can help with the housing. We all feel like we're in a housing crunch. I talk to, whether it's healthcare or education, we try to bring teachers and doctors and nurses out to accept jobs, and they look around and they just can't find places to live. And so, it's just driving cost and everything. So you've been working on this for a while, and I'd love to just start, one of the things we know, Vermont Futures Project has some data. A new home, it's about $170,000 of regulatory burden in the state of Vermont to build a single family home, which just is astounding when we talk about affordability and whatnot. I know Waterbury has been very involved in trying to reduce some of the regulatory burdens. A lot of this is, we ask people to come get a permit, right? Meaning to get permission to do something we really want them to do, which is to build housing. So why don't you start? Just tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing and how you and the Planning Commission there have been working to reduce that burden for people that might want to build in Waterbury.
Right. And let me actually start with what the Planning Commission's been doing, because they've really taken the lead on this for a number of years now. And they actually worked on creating a new set of zoning bylaws that would support the ability to do infill development. So if you think about the old bylaws, they were largely driven or they were largely designed for single family housing. And, single family housing that occurred during, the advent of the automobile phase, right? So there was allowances for parking spots and there were certain setbacks so that there would be adequate green space for yards and separation between the housing. And all of these things really kind of are negatives when it comes to looking at doing in what's called infill development, which is being able to take a piece of land and maximize the amount of number of units that you can have on there. So the process that someone would have to go through if they wanted to increase the density beyond what was allowed by the zoning bylaws is they'd have to put a permit, they'd have to ask for variances, they'd have to go through the development review board, which might take a number of iterations. And all of this added, both costs, as you pointed out, but also time. It could delay a project from, months to years in order to get those variances. So the Planning Commission really worked at focusing on what we call the downtown and the areas right adjacent to the downtown in Waterbury and trying to ease those zoning restrictions that would allow for further infill develop. That meant, greater heights of buildings, less setbacks, eliminate parking requirements, all of those types of things that would allow, if there was a vacant lot, that would allow us to build more units of a lot. But importantly, and what I like to talk about is if there's an existing house, how that existing house can be converted to a duplex or even have an accessory dwelling unit that would allow for additional housing.
So how long was that? How long did that process take? Was the public supportive? I mean, where does that sit currently?
I want to say I don't have exact numbers. I want to say it took them about 2 years to go
Uh,
through the whole design and then eventually the approval process, which, took a number of months and iterations before the select board. But the public was very involved. That's how I learned about it. They held a number of sessions with the public to talk about what book zoning bylaws do. They had some really great examples of for the various districts adjacent to the downtown, what the old bylaws were and what the new bylaws would be, and what that would mean in terms of the types of buildings that could be built there. So you could actually see that through the drawings that they had. And they had one session where they actually had a walking tour of the downtown area where, people in the public went out and they would talk about certain streets and how those streets might change with those. So there was a lot of public engagement. But even after all that, when they got in front of the select board, there was some public pushback to some of the things that were in there, and they had to go and make some revisions before the select board would approve it.
Okay, so we've made some progress. So that's part of it, right? And then the next part of that. So I think most folks know, of course, we'd love larger developers to come in and build the 100 units or whatever, put a brand new neighborhood in. But most of what people really need is they want walkable. You look at all the data. I mean, people want walkable communities. They want to be close to our beautiful downtowns. It's part of the draw why people move to Vermont or stay in Vermont, right? Is all that sort of space. And so infill is a big part of that. So you have, sort of enablers. So now we have, more height, we have more density. It's maybe easier to do an ADU or do a conversion of that really large Victorian house into a few units. But the people don't know that what's available and how to do it. And so I've noticed that you seem to have undertaken an educational process to the community to help them learn how they might be able to apply this to their own, because it really takes individual homeowners, property owners to make some decisions to do that. So can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing? And maybe you can even highlight your website, because I know, I was listening to one of the section on finance, and I think it's useful not just for anybody in Waterbury, but really like the whole state of Vermont could jump onto some of the educational events you've done and get an idea what they might do. So can you tell us about that, Joe?
Sure. I mean, as the Planning Commission was going through their process, the Housing Task Force was just forming. And so we were, monitoring obviously as they got their approvals. And one of the things that we, decided was that it was really great that the new zoning bylaws were there, but outside of a handful of people that were really, kind of housing geeks, we didn't either know about it or know what it meant, right? So what we decided to do was to start a program we called it Building Better Waterbury. And it was an education program that we conducted in conjunction with the Waterbury Public Library to reach out to the community to begin to talk about what are the opportunities around that. And the first session we started with was just simply, what's the process? We found out that a lot of people didn't even know where to start or when they should engage an architect, if they needed to engage an architect, if they needed to go to before the development review board, what was required. So we just started with an overall session on what's the process for getting permitting and, what would that, and then how did that change with the new bylaws? So that was the first session that we did. The second session, we actually engaged a local architect to, he had done a project for the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission to begin to envision how several properties might add an ADU. And there's, different types of ADUs. So he came in for the second session, and I think he brought with him 5 or 6 examples that not only showed how an ADU might be put in, but actually provided some good cost estimates for how much it might cost to construct that, which I think was very, very valuable. Then, as you mentioned, the third session was really on financing. We looked at both what would be, kind of standard private financing through banks, as well as we talked about the VHIP program that was available from the state, what that offered to potential developers, but also what it required from those developers in terms of affordability. And then we had the fourth session on just becoming a landlord, because most of the people that want to do this, these small scale developers, I mean, they've never been landlords before, right? So they have no idea like what's the process for, advertising and you have fair housing requirements and all of those things. So that was the whole set. That was the whole fourth session. So we ran that. I think we started in the cold weather and ended in the warm. So it was over a period of 6 months. But basically,
Where is that content if people want to find it?
yeah, it's on the Waterbury website, though, is waterburyvt.com. And if you
Uh-huh.
go under the housing task force at the bottom, you'll see Building Better Waterbury, and the sessions are there. That's where the videos are. Now, what we're doing is trying to repurpose that into other types of printed materials and things that we can use to continue to reach out into the community.
That's so great. I mean, really, I think California led the way with a statewide law allowing ADUs, and they're similar to us, where it's, incredibly expensive place to live. And I think it's taken some time for, homeowners to get the traction, but they actually have, there's lots and lots of units that have been created in California as a result of that. And so it's just a matter of how do we educate? How do people do it? Once people see this happening in their neighborhoods and there's new people living in their neighborhoods, right? Then it'll become a thing. But in the meantime, like you got to get the early adopters, and that's a lot of education. So Joe, thanks for the work you're doing there. You had mentioned when I had first connected with you, there's some money that's been dedicated. Is that the city of Waterbury? Tell me a little bit about some funds that could be available.
Right. So Waterbury is a town, and it is a town that put in a local options tax. And as part of that, one of the uses of that local option tax would be for housing. So the task force, the housing task force, proposed the development of a housing trust fund that would be funded, on a regular basis, annual basis from the housing from that local options tax. And then once we established that, we had to develop a program. So what we did is we wanted to have something that would be kind of fast to market and also that we know would be successful. So what we did is we modeled a program off of the so-called VHIP, the Vermont Home Improvement Program, which the state's run for a number of years now, and they've had a good amount of success with that program, especially when it comes to doing ADUs. So we modeled a program after that was specific for Waterbury residents, and we're in the process of getting that rolled out now.
Oh, that's amazing. So I look forward. When will we be able to find out what that looks like? I mean, there's a lot of cities and towns that probably could model off of what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, we know what it looks like is actually already approved by the select board, right? In exchange for $30,000, we're offering we're offering $30,000 to support construction of an ADU or duplex, essentially to increase the housing capacity in
Is it a
Waterbury.
loan? Is it a grant? What is it?
It's a grant, and in exchange for that, what we're asking for is 5 years of affordability. And we've defined affordability as part of kind of targeted towards our workforce housing. So we
Yeah.
use it, I think, of 110% of the area median income of Washington County.
So a homeowner that commits to, hey, for 5 years, I'm going to keep this to 110% area median income.
Yeah,
They've got a $30,000.
grant.
That's really powerful. That's
Yeah,
amazing. Do you know? Well, I guess it isn't out yet, right?
it's not
So
right. Yeah, yeah.
you don't have any idea of demand. Do you know how many of those grants you can support per year based on your tax roll?
So the first one is going to be just three. I mean, we had allocation of for the initial year of the local option tax of $100,000 to the trust fund. So we'll only be able to do three. We do know that again, it's a matter of awareness. While if you kind of look at the statistics across the state of VHIP, there's only been three applicants or four applicants in Waterbury for
Yeah.
the VHIP program, right? So again, we're trying to do is promote awareness around these types of funds that are available to help out, with construction in exchange for affordability.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Joe, thanks for the good work you're doing again. I think it's getting some early adopters. This is really what it's about. It's helping people see that there are options to be able to move forward. And, you know, I mean, you look at so many people want to downsize. They live in that 3,000 square foot house that's only used for like the holidays or something, right? And it's like, okay, how do we make better use of this great trust that we've been gifted and the beautiful communities that we have and educating people on how we can increase our density. It's just really, really important. So, Joe, thanks for the good work you're doing, and hopefully we'll follow up as you get these things running and see some units being built.
Yeah, and I'm excited for the new podcast. So definitely keep me informed. I'll drop it into my regular playlist because I'm looking forward to learning what others are doing in this area.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Joe.